Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Jimmy Hammond adjusted his Armani tie in the hotel mirror, preparing for another day at the tech conference in Seattle. At 38, he commanded respect in boardrooms across the country as CEO of Hammond Security Solutions, a company he'd built from nothing after his military discharge. His steel-gray eyes reflected the same cold determination that had earned him a Silver Star in Afghanistan and later helped him create a multi-million-dollar empire. The phone buzzed against the marble counter. Lily flashed on the screen, his 9-year-old daughter. Strange. It was 2 a.m. back in Chicago. "Hey, princess, what are you?" Sobbing. Heart-wrenching, desperate sobbing that made his blood freeze. "Daddy." Lily's voice cracked through tears. "Mommy's boyfriend starved me for 3 days. He said if I call you again, he'll send me to the homeless shelter. I'm so hungry, Daddy. I'm scared." Jimmy's grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. "What did you say?" "Steve locked the pantry and refrigerator. Mommy went to her book club, and he said I couldn't eat until I apologized for being a spoiled brat. But I didn't do anything wrong, Daddy. I just asked for cereal." The tactical part of Jimmy's mind began calculating. Flight times, alibis, consequences. The father in him wanted to tear Chicago apart brick by brick. "Where are you now, sweetheart?" "Hiding in my closet. He doesn't know I have Mommy's old phone." Jimmy's jaw clenched. "Stay hidden. Daddy's coming home." He immediately called his ex-wife, Marion Powers. They divorced 2 years ago when he discovered her affair with Steve Lynch, a small-time contractor with a reputation for bar fights and unpaid debts. Marion had played the victim, claiming Jimmy was emotionally unavailable and married to his work. The court had awarded her primary custody, despite Jimmy's protests about Steve's character. "Jimmy, do you know what time it is?" Marion's voice was groggy, irritated. "Our daughter just called me crying, saying your boyfriend starved her for 3 days. She's lying. Steve would never hurt anyone. Lily's been acting out since the divorce, making up stories for attention." In the background, Jimmy heard a gruff voice. "Tell her loser daddy he can't save his useless daughter." Something inside Jimmy died. Something else was born. "I'm coming home, Marion. Tonight. You can't just..." Jimmy hung up and dialed another number. "Isaac, it's Jimmy. I need the jet fueled and ready in 30 minutes. Chicago. Emergency." Isaac McCormick had been Jimmy's sergeant in Afghanistan and now served as head of security for Hammond Solutions. Loyal to a fault, he never asked questions when Jimmy used that particular tone. "Roger that. Anything else?" "Call Derek Church. Tell him I need a full background workup on Stephen Lynch. Everything. Financial, criminal, medical, family. I want to know what he ate for breakfast in 3rd grade. Copy. ETA to Chicago." Jimmy checked his Rolex. 4 hours. As the private jet climbed through the clouds, Jimmy sat in the leather captain's chair, steeple his fingers. He'd built his fortune on 3 principles: loyalty, precision, and consequences. Those who crossed him learned that Jimmy Hammond never forgot, and he never forgave. Marion had chosen her side when she chose Steve over their daughter's welfare. Now she would learn what that choice cost. The plane's cabin was silent except for the hum of engines. Jimmy opened his laptop and began making calls. By the time they landed at O'Hare, he would have resources in motion that would make the next few months very interesting for Marion and Steve. First, he would secure Lily. Then, he would remind Chicago why crossing Jimmy Hammond was a mistake people only made once. Chapter 2. Pieces in Motion. The Gulfstream touched down at O'Hare at 6:47 a.m. Jimmy hadn't slept, but adrenaline and cold fury kept him sharp. Isaac met him at the private terminal with a black Suburban and a thick manila folder. Full background on Stephen Lynch. Isaac reported as they drove through morning traffic. 34 years old, 2 previous domestic violence arrests. Both charges dropped when the women recanted. 3 DUIs, numerous bar fights. Currently behind on child support for 2 kids from previous relationships. Jimmy flipped through police reports and credit histories. What about employment? Lynch Construction, a one-man operation that's been struggling since the pandemic. He owes money to half the suppliers in Cook County. Your ex-wife's been covering his debts. Of course she had. Marion always had a weakness for broken men she thought she could fix. It's what had attracted her to Jimmy after his discharge, when PTSD and survivor's guilt had nearly destroyed him. The difference was, Jimmy had actually gotten better. What's our legal position on custody? Isaac handed him another file. Our attorney says with documented child endangerment, we can file for emergency custody today. Judge Patricia Richmond owes you a favor from the charity fundraiser last year. Jimmy remembered. Judge Richmond's daughter had been kidnapped 3 years ago. Jimmy's security team had found her when the FBI couldn't. Some debts transcended money. They pulled up to Marion's house, a modest 2-story colonial in Evanston that Jimmy had bought during their marriage. His daughter was somewhere inside with people who'd proven they couldn't protect her. Boss, Isaac said quietly, there's something else. Lynch has been bragging at Murphy's bar about training your daughter. A couple of regulars said he claimed he was breaking her spoiled attitude. The temperature in the SUV seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jimmy's voice came out in a whisper that Isaac recognized from their combat days. The voice that preceded very bad things happening to very bad people. Give me a meeting with Terrence Jones, the police lieutenant. He owes me from the Ramirez case. I want everything they have on Lynch that never made it to court. Witnesses who were too scared to testify, evidence that got buried, sealed juvenile records, everything. Jimmy stepped out of the vehicle and straightened his jacket. Time to collect his daughter. The front door opened before he could knock. Marion stood there in a bathrobe, her once beautiful face puffy from sleep and stress. Behind her, Steve Lynch lounged in Jimmy's old recliner, wearing a stained undershirt and a smirk. You can't just show up here, Marion said. We have a custody agreement. Where's Lily? She's fine. She's grounded for lying about. Daddy. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, still in the same clothes from 3 days ago. She was thinner than when Jimmy had seen her 2 weeks ago, with dark circles under her eyes that made his heart break and his rage burn hotter. She started to run down the stairs, but Steve's voice boomed. Get back to your room, brat. Lily froze, terrified. Jimmy stepped into the house, his presence suddenly filling the space like a gathering storm. Lily, come here. She's not going anywhere, Steve said, standing up. He was bigger than Jimmy, maybe 6'4" and 240 pounds, with the soft muscle of a former high school athlete gone to seed. This is my house now. Actually, Jimmy said conversationally, it's my house. I pay the mortgage. My name's on the deed. He looked at Marion. Did you forget to mention that to Steve? Steve's confident expression flickered. Marion's face went pale. Lily. Jimmy called again, never taking his eyes off Steve. Come to Daddy. This time she ran, launching herself into his arms. Jimmy held her tight, feeling how thin she'd gotten, smelling the fear and sadness in her hair. I want to go home with you, Daddy, she whispered. You are going home with me, he whispered back. Then, louder, Marion, pack her things. She's coming with me. You can't just. I can and I am. I've already filed for emergency custody. The hearing is this afternoon. Jimmy's voice remained calm, but something in his tone made Steve take a step back. I have documented evidence of child neglect and endangerment. Unless you want to spend the next 10 years fighting criminal charges, I suggest you don't interfere. Marion's face crumpled. Jimmy, please. She's lying. Steve would never. Steve told our 9-year-old daughter he'd send her to a homeless shelter. Steve locked away food to punish a child. Steve called her useless. Jimmy's voice dropped to that whisper again. Steve is about to learn what happens when someone hurts my family. Steve puffed up his chest. You threatening me? Jimmy smiled. A cold, calculating expression that made Isaac unconsciously check his sidearm. Steve, I don't make threats. I make promises. And I promise you this. You've made a very serious mistake. He turned to Marion. You have 10 minutes to pack Lily's things, or I'll have them delivered to my house later. Choose. As Marion hurried upstairs, Jimmy knelt down to Lily's level. Are you hurt anywhere else, princess? She shook her head, but whispered. He said mean things about you. Called you names. What kind of names? He said you were a killer who couldn't keep his wife happy. He said you were weak. Jimmy glanced at Steve, who was trying to look tough while clearly calculating his options. What do you think, sweetheart? Do I look weak to you? Lily studied her father's face, the scars along his jawline from Afghanistan, the granite-hard eyes, the way he held himself like a coiled spring. No, Daddy. You look scary. Good. Because sometimes Daddy has to be scary to protect the people he loves. 10 minutes later, they walked out with 2 suitcases and Lily's favorite stuffed animal. Steve watched from the window, and Jimmy made sure to meet his eyes one last time. The hunt was on. Chapter 3, The Gathering Storm. Judge Patricia Richmond's courtroom felt like hallowed ground to Jimmy. This was where justice lived, where wrongs were made right. At 2 p.m. sharp, she granted him temporary emergency custody of Lily, citing credible evidence of child endangerment and neglect. Marion wept. Steve didn't even show up. That evening, Jimmy tucked Lily into bed in her old room at his penthouse apartment, a room he'd kept exactly as she'd left it, hoping for more custody time that had never come. She looked small in the big bed, but healthier already after Mrs. Chun, his housekeeper, had fed her homemade soup and cookies. "Daddy, are you really scary?" she asked sleepily. "Only to people who deserve it, princess. Never to you." "Will Steve hurt Mommy now that I'm gone?" Jimmy considered lying, then decided she deserved truth. "I don't know, but that's not your problem to worry about anymore. Do you still love Mommy?" The question hit harder than he'd expected. "I love who your mommy used to be. But people change, sweetheart. Sometimes they make choices that change who they are." After Lily fell asleep, Jimmy poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and opened the files Isaac had compiled. Steve Lynch's life was laid out in meticulous detail, and Jimmy studied it like a general planning a campaign. The phone rang at 11 p.m. "Hello, Marion." "Jimmy." Her voice was thick with tears. "Steve's gone crazy. After you left, he started drinking and throwing things. He said it was my fault, that I was weak for letting you take Lily. And he hit me, Jimmy. He's never done that before." Jimmy felt a flicker of something. Not sympathy, exactly, but recognition of the woman she'd once been. "Do you want to press charges?" I don't know. He said he was sorry. He said he was just upset." "Marion, listen to me very carefully. Men like Steve don't stop with one hit. They escalate. If you stay, it will get worse." Jimmy paused. "But that's your choice. You chose him over me, over our daughter's safety. Now you get to live with the consequences." "Jimmy, please. I know I made mistakes, but—" "You didn't make mistakes, Marion. You made choices. There's a difference." Jimmy's voice hardened. "You chose to believe him over our daughter. You chose to let a man abuse my child. You chose him." Silence stretched between them. "What are you going to do to Steve?" she finally asked. "What needs to be done?" "Jimmy, don't do anything illegal. I couldn't live with. You lost the right to care about my choices when you stopped protecting our daughter." Jimmy hung up. The next morning, Derek Church arrived at Jimmy's office with another file, this one much thicker. "You're going to love this," Derek said, spreading photographs across the conference table. "Stephen Lynch isn't just an abusive boyfriend. He's running a side business." Jimmy studied the surveillance photos. Steve meeting with known drug dealers, accepting packages, making handoffs. Trafficking, small-time distribution. Mostly pills. Oxy, fentanyl, whatever he can get. Uses his construction jobs as cover for deliveries. DEA's been watching him for 6 months, but haven't moved yet because they want his supplier. Who's his supplier? Derek grinned. That's where it gets interesting. Alan Lawson, remember him? Jimmy's blood went cold. Alan Lawson had been his platoon medic in Afghanistan. He'd been discharged after getting caught selling medical supplies to local insurgents. Jimmy had testified at his court-martial. Alan's been running pills out of 3 clinics on the south side. Steve's one of his street-level distributors. Derek leaned back. "Thought you'd want to know you're dealing with someone who's already betrayed you once." Jimmy stared at the photographs. This wasn't just about Steve hurting his daughter anymore. This was about a cancer that had spread through multiple parts of his life. Marion's betrayal, Alan's betrayal, and now Steve's abuse of Lily. "I want everything," Jimmy said quietly. "Every transaction, every contact, every weakness. I want to know who's protecting them, who's buying from them, and who's afraid of them. What's the play?" Jimmy stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. The city spread out below him like a chessboard. "We're going to give them exactly what they deserve. All of them." He turned back to Derek. "How long would it take to get close to Alan's operation? With the right introduction? Maybe 2 weeks. Make it happen. I want someone inside before the month is out." "Boss," Derek said carefully, "this isn't Afghanistan. There are laws here." Jimmy's smile was winter cold. "Laws are for people who respect them. These people hurt my daughter, betrayed their oaths, and poisoned their community. They've moved beyond the protection of civilized society. So what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to remind Chicago what happens when you cross the wrong person." Jimmy picked up one of the surveillance photos of Steve. "But first, I'm going to destroy Steve Lynch in every way that matters." His business, his reputation, his freedom, his relationships, everything. When I'm done, he'll beg for prison just to escape what I've turned his life into. And then we'll see how sorry he really is. Chapter 4. The Web Titans. 2 weeks later, Jimmy's plan was in motion like a Swiss watch. He sat in his office, watching security footage from 3 different angles as Steve Lynch's world began to crumble in real time. Isaac knocked and entered with a tablet. Phase 1 is complete. Lynch Construction just lost their biggest contract. Turns out the client discovered some irregularities in Steve's insurance documentation. Jimmy smiled thinly. The irregularities had been planted by Jimmy's people, but they were based on real gaps in Steve's shoddy record-keeping. What's his financial situation? Desperate. He's got maybe 2 weeks before he defaults on everything. The banks are already making noises. Perfect. Desperate men made stupid decisions. What about Alan's operation? Isaac's expression grew more serious. Brian Craig made contact yesterday. Alan's paranoid but greedy. He's agreed to a meeting with our new investor tomorrow night. Brian Craig was one of Jimmy's most trusted operatives, a former DEA agent who'd left the agency after a bureaucratic betrayal cost him a major case. He had the credentials and street credibility to sell himself as a dirty businessman looking to launder money through Alan's drug operation. And Marion? She filed a police report about the domestic violence, but withdrew it 12 hours later. She's staying at her sister's house, but she's been seen at Murphy's bar with Lynch twice this week. Jimmy's jaw tightened. Even after everything, she was still choosing Steve. Some people never learned. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Hammond, Judge Richmond is online too. Jimmy picked up. Patricia. Jimmy, I've been hearing disturbing rumors about your interest in certain individuals. Judge Richmond's voice was carefully neutral. I want to remind you that the custody hearing next week needs to proceed without any complications. Of course, I'm simply a concerned father protecting his daughter. See that it stays that way. I can't protect you if you cross certain lines. After she hung up, Jimmy realized his network of contacts was being watched. Someone had warned Patricia about his activities. That meant either law enforcement was tracking him or someone in his organization had loose lips. The thought didn't worry him. It energized him. That evening, Jimmy attended Lily's parent-teacher conference alone. Mrs. Goodman, her teacher, had nothing but praise for Lily's resilience and improvement since she'd come to live with him full-time. She's like a different child, Mrs. Goodman said. More confident, happier. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Driving home, Jimmy called Marion. She answered on the 5th ring, and he could hear bar noise in the background. Let me guess, he said. Murphy's bar with Steve. He's trying to change, Jimmy. He knows he made mistakes. Mistakes. Jimmy's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper. He starved our daughter, Marion. He terrorized her. He hit you. Those aren't mistakes. They're choices. You don't understand how hard his life has been. I don't care how hard his life has been. I care that he hurt our daughter, and you're still choosing him over her. Silence. Then, the custody hearing is next week. I'm going to fight for shared custody. With what lawyer? Your boyfriend's broke, Marion. His business is failing. He's about to lose his apartment, and the police are asking questions about his extracurricular activities. What did you do? I told you. I'm giving him exactly what he deserves. Jimmy pulled into his parking garage. But I'm curious. When he loses everything and his true nature comes out, when he takes his rage and frustration out on you because you're the only target left, will you finally understand the choice you made? He loves me. No, Marion. He needs you. There's a difference. Love protects. Need consumes. The line went dead. Upstairs, Jimmy found Lily in the kitchen with Mrs. Chun, making cookies for her school bake sale. She looked up at him with flour on her nose and a genuine smile, the first he'd seen from her since the divorce. Daddy, Mrs. Chun is teaching me to make snickerdoodles. They smell amazing, princess. Jimmy hugged her, careful not to get flour on his suit. How was school? Good. Tommy Martinez asked me to be his partner for the science project. And Mrs. Goodman said I'm reading at a 6th grade level now. Jimmy's heart swelled with pride and protectiveness. This was what mattered. This was what he was fighting for. Not revenge, exactly, but ensuring that the people who threatened his daughter's happiness faced consequences. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Jimmy received a text from Brian Craig. Meeting confirmed. Tomorrow, 11 p.m., Warehouse District. Alan's bringing 2 associates. Jimmy replied, Roger. Full surveillance. No direct contact unless necessary. The next phase was about to begin. Alan Lawson had no idea that his old commander was about to settle an 8-year-old debt. But first, Jimmy had one more card to play with Steve Lynch. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Salvatore Winter. Sal, it's Jimmy Hammond. Salvatore Winter owned half the construction contracts in Chicago and had connections that reached deep into City Hall and deeper into places that didn't officially exist. He owed Jimmy a significant favor from a problem that had been quietly resolved 5 years ago. Jimmy, how's retirement treating you? I need a favor, Sal. Someone's been causing problems for my daughter. Say no more. What do you need? Stephen Lynch, small-time contractor. I need him blacklisted from every job in the city. Not just your contracts, everyone's contracts. Consider it done. Anyone who hurts kids is dead to this business. Sal paused. Anything else? Word-of-mouth campaign. Let people know he's unreliable, steals from job sites, shows up drunk. Nothing that can be traced back, just enough to poison the well. Jimmy, by next week, Steve Lynch won't be able to get hired to clean porta-potties. I appreciate it, Sal. We look after family. Your little girl okay? Jimmy looked toward Lily's room, where she was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. She's perfect. After he hung up, Jimmy poured himself a bourbon and stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. Phase 2 would begin tomorrow night. Alan Lawson would learn that some betrayals had very long consequences. But tonight was for planning Phase 3, the final act that would remove Steve Lynch from their lives permanently. Some men could be reformed. Some men could be reasoned with. Some men could be scared straight. Steve Lynch wasn't one of those men. He was a cancer that needed to be cut out completely. Jimmy raised his glass to the window. To consequences, he said to the empty room. Chapter 5, Old Debts. The warehouse in the South Side Industrial District looked abandoned, but Jimmy knew better. From his position in a van 3 blocks away, he watched through high-definition cameras as Brian Craig walked into what appeared to be an empty building. Inside, the warehouse hummed with activity. Alan Lawson had converted it into a sophisticated pill distribution center, complete with cutting stations, packaging equipment, and enough security to rival a small military base. Alan looked older than his 35 years, with the hollow-eyed appearance of someone who sampled his own product. He was flanked by 2 men Jimmy didn't recognize, large, scarred, and armed. So you're the money man Brian told me about, Alan said, his voice carrying the paranoid edge of a longtime addict. I represent certain interests that prefer anonymity, Brian replied smoothly. What matters is that I have capital to invest, and you have an operation that needs scaling up. Jimmy listened through Brian's wire, watching Alan's body language on the surveillance feed. His former medic was trying to appear confident, but Jimmy could see the tells, the constant scanning of exits, the way his hand kept drifting toward his weapon, the slight tremor in his voice. Guilty conscience, Jimmy thought. Good. Before we talk numbers, Alan said, I need to know your background. This business doesn't forgive mistakes. Former DEA, dirty for 5 years before I saw the light. I've got connections in 3 major cities and enough clean money to wash whatever you're moving. Brian had rehearsed this cover story until it was second nature. What made you reach out to me specifically? Brian smiled. Word on the street is you've got military training, keeps your operation tight. I respect that. Most of these street dealers are sloppy, get everyone caught. Alan preened slightly. Army medic, did 2 tours. Learned discipline. Afghanistan. Yeah. Served under some real hard-ass commander. Guy was a real Boy Scout. Thought the Army was about honor and duty and all that bullshit. Alan laughed bitterly. Took me a while to realize the only person who matters in this world is yourself. Jimmy's hands tightened into fists. Even now, Alan was rewriting history, painting himself as the victim of Jimmy's unreasonable standards. What happened to the commander? Brian asked casually. Probably sitting behind some desk somewhere, following rules while the real players make real money. Alan gestured around the warehouse. I learned the most important lesson over there. Loyalty is for suckers. Everyone's for sale if you find the right price. That was enough. Jimmy had heard all he needed to hear. He keyed his radio. Isaac, move your team into position. Derek, is our SWAT contact ready? Standing by, Derek's voice crackled back. Lieutenant Jones has a full tactical team 2 minutes out, waiting for your signal. Not yet. Let them finish the meeting. I want Alan to feel safe, to think he's won. On screen, Brian was negotiating the details of a fictional money laundering operation, stringing Alan along with promises of expanded territory and increased profits. Alan was eating it up, already spending money he didn't have. There's one condition, Brian said. My investors need assurance that your current distribution network is reliable. We've heard some of your street dealers are getting sloppy. Like who? Stephen Lynch. Word is he's drawing attention, making mistakes. Alan's expression darkened. Steve's been a problem lately. Personal issues affecting his judgment. We've been considering cutting him loose. What kind of personal issues? Baby mama drama. His girlfriend's ex-husband is some hotshot businessman, been putting pressure on Steve's construction business. Steve's been drinking more, taking more risks. Alan shrugged. Weak men let women make them weak. Jimmy smiled coldly. Phase 1 was working better than expected. If Steve's compromised, maybe it's time to eliminate the problem, Brian suggested. Eliminate. Send a message. Show your other dealers what happens when they become liabilities. Alan considered this. Steve knows too much to just fire. And he owes us money. So handle it permanently. You suggesting I kill him? Brian held up his hands. I'm suggesting you handle your business problems however you see fit. My investors just need assurance that loose ends don't become legal problems. Alan grinned nastily. Steve Lynch won't be a problem much longer. I can promise you that. Jimmy keyed his radio again. That's enough. Move in. The warehouse doors exploded inward as SWAT officers flooded the building. Alan's security team went for their weapons, but they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Within 30 seconds, everyone was on the ground in zip-tie cuffs. Alan's face went white as he realized the scope of the trap. This is entrapment. You can't. Lieutenant Terrence Jones walked in, removing his tactical helmet. Alan Lawson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, conspiracy to commit murder, and threatening the life of Stephen Lynch. I didn't threaten anyone. We have it on tape. You just agreed to eliminate a business associate. Jones smiled grimly. Funny thing about conspiracy charges, intent is enough. As they dragged Alan away, he spotted Brian removing his wire and suddenly understood. You son of a bitch. This was a setup. Brian looked at him with professional satisfaction. Yes, it was. Who are you working for? Who wanted me? Jones leaned down to Alan's ear. Someone who doesn't forget. Someone who doesn't forgive. Someone whose little girl you helped put in danger. Recognition dawned in Alan's eyes just before they shoved him into the patrol car. Jimmy watched from the van as his former medic was driven away. One down, one to go. His phone buzzed with a text from Marion. Steve's missing. He never came home last night. His truck was found abandoned near the docks. I'm scared, Jimmy. Jimmy smiled and typed back. Don't worry. I'm sure he'll turn up. But Steve Lynch wouldn't turn up. Not alive, anyway. Because while Jimmy had been orchestrating Alan's arrest, Steve had made the fatal mistake of trying to intimidate the wrong person's family. Phase 3 was already in motion. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. Steve Lynch woke up in darkness, his head pounding from the chloroform and his wrists burning from zip ties. As his vision cleared, he realized he was in some kind of basement or warehouse, sitting in a metal chair under a single bare bulb. Welcome back, Steve. The voice came from the shadows beyond the light. Steve squinted, trying to see who was speaking. Who's there? What do you want? I want to have a conversation about consequences. Jimmy Hammond stepped into the light, no longer the composed businessman Steve had faced in Marion's living room. This version of Jimmy wore black tactical pants and a dark sweater, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator. You crazy bastard. This is kidnapping. When the cops find out. The cops won't find out, Steve. Because you're going to disappear. Jimmy pulled another chair into the light and sat down, just out of Steve's reach. But first, we're going to talk about what you did to my daughter. I didn't hurt that little brat. She's a liar, just like her mother. Jimmy's hand moved so fast Steve barely saw it. Pain exploded across his cheek as Jimmy backhanded him with mechanical precision. Wrong answer. Try again. Blood ran from Steve's split lip. You can't do this. I know my rights. Your rights. Jimmy laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Steve, you gave up your rights when you decided to abuse a child. When you decided to threaten my family. When you decided to make my daughter afraid. Jimmy stood, and began pacing around the chair like a shark circling prey. Do you know what I did in Afghanistan, Steve? I hunted people. Bad people who hurt innocent civilians. I was very good at it. You're bluffing. You wouldn't kill me. You're too much of a Boy Scout. Jimmy stopped pacing and knelt down until his face was inches from Steve's. Alan Lawson said the same thing about loyalty. He's spending the next 15 to 20 years in federal prison because he underestimated how far I'd go to protect what's mine. Steve's eyes widened. Alan's in prison? As of 6 hours ago. Conspiracy to distribute narcotics and conspiracy to commit murder. Funny thing about conspiracy charges, Steve, they don't require you to actually follow through. Just the intent is enough. Murder? Alan never killed anyone. No, but he agreed to kill you. We have him on tape discussing how to eliminate you as a liability to his drug operation. Jimmy smiled coldly. Of course, you won't be around to testify at his trial, so that particular charge might get dropped. Steve's face went pale as the implications sank in. You set this up. All of it. Alan betrayed me 8 years ago in Afghanistan. You hurt my daughter 2 weeks ago. I don't forget, and I don't forgive. Jimmy walked to a table Steve couldn't see and picked up something metallic. The question now is how much you suffer before this ends. What do you want from me? I want you to understand the choice you made. Jimmy returned with a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters. You could have been a decent man. You could have treated my daughter with kindness. You could have built a life with Marion based on respect and love. Steve tugged frantically at the zip ties, but they only cut deeper into his wrists. Instead, you chose to be a bully. You chose to terrorize a child. You chose to hit the woman you claimed to love. Jimmy tested the wire cutters with a sharp snap. Now you get to live with the consequences of those choices. Well, briefly. Wait. I can change. I was going to apologize to Lily, I swear. You told my daughter she was useless. You told her I couldn't save her. You made her afraid to eat in her own home. Jimmy's voice remained calm, conversational. Do you know what fear does to a child's mind, Steve? It creates scars that never fully heal. I was drunk. I didn't mean it. But you did mean it. Because you did it again the next day. And the day after that. Being drunk doesn't make you cruel, Steve. It just removes your inhibitions enough to show who you really are. Jimmy knelt down again, this time holding the wire cutters where Steve could see them clearly. I'm going to ask you some questions. If you lie, you lose a finger. If you tell the truth, you keep it. Simple rules, easy to follow. This is insane. Question 1. How many times did you hit Marion? Steve's eyes darted frantically around the basement, looking for escape routes that didn't exist. I don't know. Maybe 3 or 4 times. Snap. The wire cutters closed on empty air, just inches from Steve's hand. Wrong answer. I know about the times neighbors called the police. I know about the bruises she covered with makeup. I know about the ER visit she claimed was from falling downstairs. Jimmy's voice never changed tone. How many times? Maybe a dozen. I lost count. Better. Question 2. What did you really do to my daughter besides starve her? Nothing. I swear I never touched her. Jimmy sighed and moved the wire cutters towards Steve's pinky finger. Wait. Okay. I grabbed her arm once when she was trying to get food. Left bruises. And I might have pushed her down once when she was being mouthy. Might have. I did. I pushed her down. But that's all, I swear. Jimmy nodded thoughtfully. Question 3. What were you planning to do to her if I hadn't taken her away? Nothing. I just wanted to teach her some respect. The wire cutters touched Steve's finger, and he screamed. I was going to send her to my cousin in Wisconsin. He runs a work camp for troubled kids. She would have learned discipline. Jimmy's blood went cold. He knew what kind of work camps Steve's type would run. For how long? Until she learned to behave. Maybe a year, maybe longer. That was enough. Jimmy had heard all he needed to justify what came next. Final question, Steve. If I let you go right now, would you leave Chicago and never contact Marion or Lily again? Hope flickered in Steve's eyes. Yes, absolutely. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Even if Marion begged you to come back? Even if she promised to choose you over Lily? Yes. I'd stay away. Jimmy smiled and patted Steve's shoulder almost gently. See, that's the problem, Steve. I don't believe you. Because men like you don't change. You'd lay low for a few months, maybe a year, then you'd come back. You'd convince Marion you were sorry, that you'd changed. And eventually, you'd hurt someone I love again. I wouldn't. I swear on my mother's grave. Your mother's not dead, Steve. She lives in Peoria and hasn't spoken to you in 3 years because you stole money from her purse. Jimmy stood up and walked back to the table. I told you I don't forget, and I don't forgive. I meant it. When Jimmy returned, he was carrying a syringe filled with clear liquid. What is that? Fentanyl. About 10 times the lethal dose. Alan was kind enough to provide it before his arrest. Jimmy held the syringe up to the light, checking for air bubbles. It'll look like an overdose. Given your recent stress and drinking problems, no one will question it. You can't do this. Marion will know it was you. Marion will suspect, but she'll never prove it. And deep down, she'll know you got exactly what you deserved. Jimmy moved behind Steve's chair. Besides, she made her choice. She chose you over our daughter's safety. Now she gets to live with the consequences of that choice too. Please, I have kids of my own. Kids you haven't seen in 2 years. Kids whose support payments you're behind on. Kids who'll be better off without you. Jimmy found a vein in Steve's neck. Just like everyone else in your life. Steve screamed and thrashed, but the chair was bolted to the floor and the zip ties held firm. Goodbye, Steve. Give my regards to hell. The needle slid home, and Steve's struggles gradually weakened as the fentanyl flooded his system. Within 3 minutes, he was dead. Jimmy checked his pulse to be sure, then began the cleanup process. By dawn, Steve Lynch's body would be found in an alley 3 miles away, just another casualty of Chicago's drug epidemic. Marion would mourn him. The police would investigate briefly, then move on to more pressing cases. Alan would spend the rest of his life in prison, probably dying of old age or another inmate's knife. And Lily would grow up safe, never knowing how close she'd come to disappearing into the nightmare Steve had planned for her. Jimmy looked at his watch. 3:47 a.m. He had 2 hours to clean up the scene and establish his alibi before Mrs. Chun arrived to make Lily's breakfast. Time to go home to his daughter. Chapter 7. Ashes and Echoes. 3 days after Steve Lynch's body was discovered, Jimmy sat in his office reading the Chicago Tribune's brief article about the apparent overdose of a local contractor. The police had spent exactly 18 hours investigating before declaring it accidental death. Case closed. Marion had called 6 times. Jimmy hadn't answered. The custody hearing was scheduled for that afternoon, and Jimmy's lawyer was confident they'd be awarded full custody given the circumstances. Steve's death, while tragic, eliminated the primary threat to Lily's welfare. Boss, Isaac said, entering with his usual morning briefing, we've got a problem. Jimmy looked up from the newspaper. What kind of problem? Detective Samuel Valencia from CPD Homicide. He's been asking questions about Steve Lynch's death. Apparently, he's not buying the overdose story. What kind of questions? About your whereabouts the night Steve died. About your military background. About whether you had any contact with Alan Lawson before his arrest. Isaac handed Jimmy a file. Valencia's a 12-year veteran, decorated detective. He's not easily fooled. Jimmy flipped through Valencia's service record. What's his connection to this case? He wasn't assigned to it originally, but he requested a transfer after the initial investigation was closed. Seems he has a problem with what he calls convenient coincidences, such as Alan Lawson gets arrested for drug trafficking and conspiracy to commit murder. 48 hours later, his intended victim turns up dead from an overdose of the same drugs Alan was distributing. Meanwhile, the victim's girlfriend's ex-husband, who happens to be a former Special Forces operator with significant resources, gains full custody of their daughter. Jimmy had to admit Valencia was thorough. What's he found? Nothing concrete yet, but he's building a timeline. He knows about Lily's call to you in Seattle, knows about your emergency flight back, knows about the custody filing. He's trying to establish whether you had opportunity and means. And motive. He's already established motive. Steve abused your daughter and hit your ex-wife. Valencia thinks that's plenty of reason for someone with your background to take matters into his own hands. Jimmy considered this. A persistent detective could be a problem, but only if he found evidence. Jimmy had been careful, but no operation was perfect. Have we identified any weaknesses in our cleanup? None that I can see. The injection site was hidden by decomposition. The fentanyl levels were consistent with recreational overdose, and Steve's recent financial problems gave him plenty of reason to start using. Isaac paused. But Valencia's not looking at the physical evidence. He's looking at the pattern. What pattern? He thinks you orchestrated Alan's arrest specifically to eliminate Steve while making it look unrelated. He's trying to prove you used Brian Craig to set up Alan, knowing that Alan would implicate Steve in criminal activity, giving you cover to eliminate him. Jimmy smiled thinly. Valencia was smarter than expected. That was exactly what had happened. What's his next move? He's requested permission to reopen the case officially. If he gets approval, he'll have resources to dig deeper into your activities. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Hammond, you have a visitor. Detective Valencia from Chicago PD. Jimmy and Isaac exchanged glances. Send him in. Detective Samuel Valencia was a compact man in his 40s, with intelligent eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent years solving complex puzzles. He entered the office with the confidence of a man who believed in justice. Mr. Hammond, thank you for seeing me. Detective, I assume this is about Steve Lynch. It is. Valencia took the seat across from Jimmy's desk without being invited. I'm sorry for your family's loss. Steve wasn't family, but he was part of your daughter's life. That had to be difficult for you. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, studying Valencia's face. Detective, if you have questions, ask them directly. I don't have time for verbal chess. Valencia smiled appreciatively. Fair enough. Where were you the night Steve Lynch died? At home with my daughter. Mrs. Chun can verify I was there when she arrived at 6 a.m. to prepare breakfast. That leaves about 8 hours unaccounted for. I was sleeping. Single fathers need their rest. Did you know Alan Lawson before his arrest? We served together in Afghanistan. I testified at his court-martial 8 years ago. So you knew he was involved in drug trafficking. I knew he'd been arrested. The details weren't my concern. Valencia pulled out a small notebook. Weren't you curious about his operation? Especially given that he was supplying drugs to the man who was abusing your daughter? Jimmy's expression didn't change. Detective, are you accusing me of something? I'm trying to understand a series of coincidences that seem highly unlikely to be random. Such as, your daughter calls you crying about abuse. You fly home immediately and file for emergency custody. Within 2 weeks, Alan Lawson, a man who betrayed you years ago, gets arrested in an elaborate sting operation. 48 hours later, the man who abused your daughter dies of an overdose from drugs supplied by Alan. Jimmy nodded thoughtfully. When you put it like that, it does sound coincidental. Too coincidental. Detective Valencia, let me ask you something. Do you have children? 2 daughters. Then you understand that a father will do anything to protect his children. Anything legal, of course. Of course. Valencia closed his notebook. Mr. Hammond, I want you to know that I'm going to keep investigating this case. If Steve Lynch was murdered, I'm going to prove it. I hope you do, Detective. Justice should be served. After Valencia left, Isaac whistled low. He's going to be a problem. Maybe. Or maybe he's going to be useful. Jimmy stood and walked to the window. Set up a meeting with Derek. I want to know everything about Detective Valencia's life. His finances, his cases, his family, his weaknesses. You thinking of eliminating him too? I'm thinking of giving him what he wants, justice. Just not the kind he's expecting. That afternoon, Judge Richmond awarded Jimmy full custody of Lily, with Marion receiving supervised visitation rights every other weekend. Marion didn't contest the ruling. She looked broken, aged 10 years in the past month. After the hearing, she approached Jimmy in the courthouse hallway. I know you killed him, she said quietly. Who? Steve. I know you killed him. Jimmy studied her face. The woman he'd once loved, now hollow-eyed and defeated. Do you have proof? I don't need proof. I know you. Do you? Because the man you knew wouldn't have been capable of what you're suggesting. You changed, Jimmy. The war changed you. No, Marion. The war revealed who I was. You changed too. You just changed into someone who chooses men who hurt children over the children themselves. Marion's face crumpled. I loved him. You loved the idea of him. You loved feeling needed by a broken man because it made you feel important. Jimmy's voice softened slightly. Steve Lynch was a predator, Marion. He would have destroyed Lily, and eventually, he would have destroyed you too. So you decided to play God? I decided to be a father. The rest was just consequences. Marion wiped her eyes. What happens now? Now you get supervised visits with our daughter. You try to rebuild your life. And you pray that Detective Valencia doesn't find what he's looking for. What if he does? Jimmy smiled, that cold, calculating smile that Marion had learned to fear. Then Detective Valencia is going to learn the same lesson Steve and Alan learned. Some people you don't cross. As Marion walked away, Jimmy felt no satisfaction, no victory. Just the quiet certainty that he'd done what needed to be done. Lily was safe. That's all that mattered. Everything else was just cleaning up loose ends. Chapter 8. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. Detective Samuel Valencia had been a cop long enough to recognize when someone was playing games with him. The Hammond case felt like a chess match where he was always 3 moves behind, but Valencia had patience and persistence on his side. He sat in his unmarked car outside Jimmy's penthouse building at 5:47 a.m., sipping cold coffee and watching the entrance. For 2 weeks, he'd been building a profile of Jimmy Hammond's activities, and what he'd found was both impressive and disturbing. Jimmy Hammond was connected to half the power brokers in Chicago. Judges, police officials, city council members, federal agents. They all owed him favors or feared his influence. Valencia had hit dead end after dead end when trying to investigate Hammond's activities the night Steve Lynch died. But Valencia had learned something important. The more powerful someone was, the more enemies they'd made along the way. And enemies could be very useful sources of information. His phone buzzed with a text from his partner, Detective Kelly Quinn, meeting with informant at 8 a.m. Says he has information about Hammond. Valencia checked his watch. Time to head to the station. An hour later, he sat across from Cecil McCullough, a small-time fence who'd been arrested 3 times in the past 5 years. Cecil was nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. This stays between us, right? If Hammond finds out I talked to you. He'll what? Valencia asked. Man, you don't understand who you're dealing with. Jimmy Hammond doesn't just have money and connections. He's got people who make problems disappear. What kind of people? Military types. Real operators. They do corporate security officially, but word on the street is they handle wet work when needed. Valencia leaned forward. Are you saying Hammond has people killed? I'm saying people who cross Jimmy Hammond tend to have bad luck. Alan Lawson crossed him, and now he's doing 20 years in federal prison. Steve Lynch crossed him, and now he's dead. Do you have proof of any of this? Cecil shook his head frantically. I don't want proof. I want to stay breathing. Then why are you talking to me? Because Hammond's been asking questions about you. About your family, your finances, your cases. When Jimmy Hammond starts researching someone, it usually doesn't end well for them. Valencia felt ice in his veins. He's investigating me? Look, detective, I like you. You've always been straight with me. Never tried to jam me up worse than I deserved. So I'm giving you a friendly warning. Drop this case. Transfer to another precinct. Take early retirement. Whatever you do, stop poking at Jimmy Hammond before he decides you're a problem that needs solving. After Cecil left, Valencia sat in the interrogation room for 10 minutes, thinking. If Hammond was investigating him, that meant Valencia was getting close to something. It also meant his family might be in danger. He pulled out his phone and called his wife. Sarah, I need you to take the girls to your mother's for a few days. What's wrong? Probably nothing, but I'm working a case that might get complicated. I'd feel better knowing you're somewhere safe. Sam, you're scaring me. Just a precaution, honey. I'll explain everything when I get home tonight. But Valencia didn't make it home that night. At 6:30 p.m., as he was leaving the station, his phone rang. Detective Valencia? This is Dr. Laura Ferris at Chicago General. Your wife and daughters were brought in after a car accident. Valencia's blood turned to ice. How bad? They're stable, but your wife has a concussion and your youngest daughter has a broken arm. You should come right away. Valencia drove to the hospital with his siren blaring, his mind racing. Car accidents happened every day in Chicago, but the timing was too convenient. He'd warned his family to be careful, and 4 hours later they were in the hospital. At the emergency room, he found Sarah conscious but groggy, with a bandage around her head. Their daughters, 8-year-old Maria and 6-year-old Elena, were scared but alert. What happened? He asked the doctor. Brake failure, according to the responding officers. The car went through a guardrail and rolled twice. They're lucky to be alive. Valencia kissed his wife's forehead and held his daughters close, but his mind was already working the angles. Brake failure was easy to cause and difficult to prove as sabotage, especially after a rollover accident. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Accidents happen to good people every day. Would hate to see another one. Perhaps it's time to consider a career change. Valencia showed the text to Quinn when she arrived at the hospital. You think Hammond did this? I know he did. This is a warning shot. What are you going to do? Valencia looked at his daughters, sleeping in their hospital beds, and felt rage building in his chest. Jimmy Hammond had just made a critical mistake. He'd threatened Valencia's family, which moved this from a professional investigation to a personal war. I'm going to destroy him, Valencia said quietly. But I'm going to do it right. Legal, by the book, bulletproof case that even his connections can't make disappear. Over the next 3 days, while his family recovered, Valencia worked like a man possessed. He reached out to federal contacts, pulled strings with the FBI, and started building a case that went far beyond Steve Lynch's death. If Jimmy Hammond wanted to play hardball, Valencia would show him what real police work looked like. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Chapter 9. The Price of Everything. 2 months after the hospital accident, Detective Valencia sat in a federal courthouse watching Jimmy Hammond's world collapse in real time. The FBI's RICO case against Hammond Security Solutions had been devastating and precise, dismantling Jimmy's empire with surgical efficiency. But Jimmy hadn't gone down easily. Valencia's investigation had uncovered a web of corruption and violence stretching back years. Jimmy's security consultants had been involved in witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and at least 3 suspicious deaths. The federal task force had built an ironclad case using Jimmy's own methods against him: surveillance, informants, and patient investigation. The turning point had come when Brian Craig, facing his own federal charges for the Allen Lawson setup, had agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Brian's testimony about Jimmy's involvement in Steve Lynch's murder had opened the floodgates. Now Jimmy sat at the defendant's table, still impeccably dressed, but no longer the untouchable power broker who had terrorized his enemies. His legal dream team was good, but not good enough to overcome a mountain of federal evidence. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Richmond asked. The irony wasn't lost on Valencia that the same judge who had awarded Jimmy custody of his daughter was now presiding over his destruction. We have, Your Honor. Valencia held his breath as the jury foreman stood. After everything, the threats, the accident, months of investigation, it came down to this moment. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Stephen Lynch, we find the defendant guilty. Jimmy's face remained impassive, but Valencia saw his hands clench slightly. On the charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and operating a criminal enterprise, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. One by one, the verdicts came down. Guilty, guilty, guilty. When it was over, Jimmy Hammond had been convicted on 17 federal felonies. The sentencing phase would come later, but Valencia knew Jimmy was looking at life in prison without parole. As the bailiffs led Jimmy away in shackles, he caught Valencia's eye across the courtroom. No anger, no rage, just the cold acknowledgement that Valencia had won their war. But the victory felt hollow to Valencia as he watched Lily Hammond in the gallery, crying as her father was taken away. The 9-year-old girl had already lost her mother to poor choices and her stepfather to violence. Now she was losing her father to justice. Marion sat beside Lily, her own face streaked with tears. She'd testified for the prosecution, admitting that she'd suspected Jimmy's involvement in Steve's death, but had been too afraid to come forward earlier. Her testimony had been crucial in establishing Jimmy's motive and opportunity. After the verdict, Valencia found Marion and Lily in the courthouse hallway. I'm sorry it ended this way, he said genuinely. Marion wiped her eyes. Are you? You got what you wanted. I wanted justice for Steve Lynch. I didn't want to destroy a family. Jimmy destroyed our family the day he decided he was judge, jury, and executioner. Marion's voice was bitter but resigned. I chose Steve over Lily's safety, and Jimmy chose revenge over everything else. We're all paying the price for our choices. Valencia knelt down to Lily's level. Hey there. I know this is hard. Lily looked at him with eyes far too old for her 9 years. Are you the one who sent my daddy to prison? I'm the one who found out the truth about what happened. My daddy says bad people should face consequences for their choices. Your daddy was right about that. Does that mean my daddy is a bad person? Valencia struggled with how to answer. Jimmy Hammond had murdered Steve Lynch in cold blood, had threatened Valencia's family, had run a criminal organization for years. But he'd also been trying to protect his daughter from a genuine threat. Your daddy made some very bad choices, Valencia said finally. But he made them because he loved you. Marion put her hand on Lily's shoulder. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go home. As they walked away, Valencia felt the weight of what he'd accomplished. Steve Lynch was still dead. Alan Lawson was still in prison. Jimmy Hammond would spend the rest of his life behind bars. And a little girl had lost her father. Justice had been served, but Valencia wondered if anyone had really won. 3 years later, Valencia received a letter at the police station. The return address was from a federal penitentiary in Colorado. Detective Valencia, I wanted you to know that I don't hold any grudges about how things ended. You were doing your job, protecting your family, seeking justice for someone you believed deserved it. I can respect that. I also wanted you to know that Lily is doing well. Marion has primary custody, but my sister visits her regularly and sends me reports. She's in therapy, getting good grades, and seems to be adjusting to a normal life. That's all I ever really wanted. You were right to stop me. I had become something dangerous, something that couldn't be allowed to continue. The war changed me, but losing Lily's mother changed me more. By the time Steve Lynch came into our lives, I was already someone who saw violence as the solution to every problem. I tell myself I was protecting my daughter, but the truth is I was protecting my pride. I couldn't accept that I'd failed to keep my family together, couldn't tolerate being powerless to help someone I loved. So I became something worse than the people I was fighting. Steve Lynch deserved consequences for what he did to Lily. But he deserved legal consequences, not a death sentence carried out in a basement. I became judge, jury, and executioner because I thought I knew better than the system. I was wrong. Lily will grow up knowing her father was a criminal who chose revenge over righteousness. That's a burden she'll carry because of my choices. I have to live with that. Thank you for stopping me before I destroyed more lives. Thank you for giving Lily a chance at a normal future. Take care of your family, detective. Hug them every day and remember that love is supposed to protect, not possess. Jimmy Hammond. Valencia folded the letter and put it in his desk drawer. Outside his office window, Chicago hummed with life. People making choices, facing consequences, trying to build better lives for themselves and their families. Justice was messy, complicated, and rarely satisfied everyone involved. But it was still justice. And sometimes, that had to be enough. Epilogue. Lily Hammond turned 18 on a warm spring day in Chicago. She'd chosen to keep her father's name despite everything that had happened, despite the whispers and stares that sometimes followed her. She was starting Northwestern University in the fall, planning to study social work. She wanted to help families in crisis, to intervene before they reached the breaking point that had destroyed her own family. Marion had remarried, a quiet accountant named William who treated Lily with kindness and respect. They'd never tried to replace her father's memory, good or bad. They'd simply tried to give her a stable, loving home where she could heal and grow. On her 18th birthday, Lily received a package from a federal penitentiary in Colorado. Inside was a college fund that had been set up in her name before her father's arrest, along with a letter. My dearest Lily, today you become an adult, and I am so proud of the young woman you've become. I know I've missed so much of your life, and I know my choices cost you more than you should have had to pay. I want you to know that every choice I made was motivated by love for you, even though love shouldn't have led me down such a dark path. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really just protecting my own pride and anger. You deserve better than what I gave you. You deserve a father who could have found a better way to handle the situation with Steve, who could have trusted the legal system to protect you, who could have put your emotional well-being ahead of his need for revenge. I hope you can forgive me someday, not because I deserve forgiveness, but because carrying anger and resentment will only hurt you. I've learned that lesson too late to help myself, but maybe not too late to help you. Use the college fund to build something beautiful with your life. Help other families avoid the mistakes we made. Show the world that good can come from even the darkest situations. I love you more than words can express, and I will carry you in my heart until my last breath. Your father, Jimmy. Lily read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and put it in her jewelry box next to a photo of her father from before the war, before the divorce, before everything went wrong. She would never visit him in prison. She would never write back. But she would use his money to help other children whose families were falling apart, and maybe that would be enough. Maybe that would be justice of a different kind. Not the harsh, final justice her father had chosen, but the healing, redemptive justice that came from building something better from the ruins of what had been destroyed. standing at her bedroom window, looking out at the city where so much pain had been caused and so much healing had taken place. Lily made her own choice about consequences and forgiveness. She chose to break the cycle. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.